Did you know that DevOps jobs are in high demand, yet more than 70% of candidates fail in their first interviews? Why? Not necessarily because they are not technically sound, but because cracking an interview successfully needs interview skills. Yes, you heard it right. You need interview skills to crack an interview, and as all other skills, you can learn and practice interview skills. You've probably had hands on experience in DevOps, but that doesn't mean you will crack an interview on the first attempt. And if you've already fed up with failing your interviews, don't worry about it. It's all part of the learning curve. In this video, I'll demonstrate step by step how to prepare for your next DevOps interview and a proven strategy that really works for you. Welcome to our channel, your go-to place for simple, hands-on, and step-by-step guides on DevOps and cloud technologies. Whether you're preparing for interviews or looking to level up your skills by simplifying complex topics, you are in the right place. Let's get started. If interviews were based on experience, then any 5-year experienced engineer would ace them. But we know that is not the case. Interviews do have rules, and in this video, I'm going to teach you about them. Start treating interviews like a skill, one that can be practiced, improved, and perfected. I've seen senior DevOps engineers fail several interviews, and I've seen new graduate students who are well prepared get high-paying jobs. Why? Because they realize that an interview is another challenge. Don't be discouraged by rejections. Some of the best engineers have failed more than 10 interviews before landing their dream job. It's just part of the process. Instead of getting down, consider each rejection as constructive feedback. Ask yourself, was I logical in my answers? Did I explain how I believe? Was I prepared for standard trends in DevOps interviews? The trick here is to learn from every interview and remain optimistic. Tip: tape your interviews with any voice recorder or your cell phone and listen to them after the interview. Write down what was good and what was not good and improve those points for the next interview. Rejection is not a measure of your worthiness. It only indicates that you should work on your approach. How to read a job description the right way. Here's something that most job applicants miss. The job description is a good guide. It tells you directly what to expect. But the most frequent mistake people make is that they read it too quickly. They read just the title of the job and overlook the rest. Slow down. Read each line carefully and highlight. Focus on required skills. When a job ad states CI/CD experience required, be prepared to talk about your pipelines. Desired skills. If they say having experience with Terraform would be a plus, this is a clue that Terraform may be addressed in the internet. Some companies use AWS heavily and some use Azure. Get ready for that. That doesn't mean they expect you to work on both. You can always highlight your primary cloud skill and drive the interview towards that. Although a firm might not be using Kubernetes now, they might ask about it since it's on their agenda. So be ready at all times with the basics of Docker and Kubernetes. Docker and Kubernetes is now a common requirement in every resume. If you still need a reason to learn them, this is the time. You don't need to be proficient on them or might not have worked on prod-grade Kubernetes workloads, but all the interviewers want to hear is that you know of them and can be able to answer some basic questions on them. Remember, the key is to gain the confidence of the interviewer that you can learn and deliver if not ready at the moment. Always remember, a job description tells you what to study. Use it wisely. Plan your resume properly. Your resume is not a laundry list of everything you've ever done. It's a sales tool to sell yourself. It has to be written specifically to the job advertisement and be intelligent and honest. Use the correct keywords. If the job ad uses CI/CD, make sure that you put your Jenkins, GitHub Actions, or GitLab CI experience in your resume. Mention your best skills. Don't mention everything you've ever dealt with. Instead, mention what you're actually good at. Always be clear and concise. A disorganized resume is always ignored. A concise, formatted one earns recruiters' attention and gets shortlisted easily. One last thing, don't overpromise. Before your resume even lands in the hands of an individual, it typically passes through an ATS, applicant tracking system. The systems filter out resumes that don't complement job descriptions well. Therefore, if your resume isn't ATS friendly, it might get rejected before anyone even reaches human eyes on it. Number 1. Follow standard format. Avoid adding complicated layouts, tables, or images. ATS systems are incapable of handling them. Present with clean, tidy sections such as summary, skills, experience, education. Number 2. Use the right keywords. ATS looks for keywords in the job description. If the JD has Terraform, Jenkins, AWS, make sure these words somehow find their way into your resume. Also remember, please don't stuff it with keywords. Only write what comes naturally to your experience. If you advertise expert Kubernetes, but you are not able to answer questions on simple kubectl command in the interview, that's an immediate red flag. Either learn it well or just remove it from your resume. Always remember, your resume must be a concise, brief message, not a life history. If you are not sure how to build your ATS resume, there are so many ATS resume builders out there in the internet, and build one for yourself. Prepare stories to tell. Okay, let's get into one of the most important mistakes people make when they are being interviewed for a job. They answer questions in a mechanical way. Interviews don't care what you know, they care about how you deliver it. If you give monosyllabic one sentence responses, you'll be part of the herd. But if you tell a good, well structured story, the interviewer will take notice. So, what exactly is this trick we are referring to here? The trick is that we use the CAR method, meaning challenge, action, result method. Let me illustrate this to you by dissecting it further with a clear and simple example to understand. Just imagine, during the interview, the interviewer asks an interesting question. Can you give me a concrete example when you could solve a substantial problem that emerged in production? A poor answer, you can tell, is a deployment failed, so I fixed it. This is just like killing your chances on the spot. A clearly structured answer following the CAR approach. You can explain the challenge as, you can say, we experienced a critical deployment failure just when we were prepared to roll out a big one, which ended up causing unplanned downtime for thousands of users who depend on our service. And the action can be explained as, I looked at the logs right away, noticed a database connection misconfigured, corrected the credentials, and rolled back safely. And finally, focus on the result. You can say, we restored the service within a less than 30-minute time frame successfully, and then I proceeded to automate the whole process so that the same problem does not occur in the future. See the difference? The second answer is showing and exemplifying problem-solving skills. That is what interviewers are impressed by. You might face it difficult to articulate this while you are in the interview, so always write them down and practice those answers beforehand so you can present them with confidence in the interview. The best way is prepare at least 2 to 3 good stories to back up your experiences prior to the interview. Consider difficult situations in your past, how you overcame them, and how it affected you. These stories might not always be yours. It can be a real stories of someone else in your team you envy of or helped you resolve. You can always post them as your achievements as long as you know exactly what they did to solve the problem, and only if you are prepared to answer any questions asked on the scenario. Get yourself ready for the thrilling journey of live coding. The next big thing in your interviews are live coding sessions, which can be terrifying. At these anxious moments, your mind freezes, your hands begin to sweat, and suddenly, even the simplest syntax seems hopelessly alien. But the trick is this: don't begin from scratch. The secret to success is to have a few good practiced and ready to go scripts in your head so that you never end up with a blank page when it's time to start. Think of this strategy as having cheat codes that are tailor made for your interview so you have an advantage. For example, if you were being requested to write a bash script solely for the purpose of deleting old log files, and you are just sitting there thinking to yourself, uh, let me just think on this for a second, you are basically wasting valuable and precious time that can be used to get something done. Instead of whatever you might have previously assumed, if you have already invested time into writing a 10-line log cleanup script, you can go ahead and simply type it out without hesitation and make any corrections as the need arises. Don't overthink it or second guess. If you spend time creating a simple 10-line log cleanup script, you can go ahead and type with confidence. You don't have to get it just right the first time. Just dive in, and you can also keeps you in charge of the circumstances. Let us consider you are completely unaware of the logic or script they asked for. Rather than losing the round, you can pick a wiser option and say, I can write a script like one I recently created and I recall it clearly. This gives you time, proves you've had real world experience, and helps you stay focused when under pressure. Interviewers know live coding is stressful. If you start with something with a structure and on the topic, you'll perform much better than if you get frustrated and quit because you're trying to create something from scratch. But here's the important thing. Whichever script you use, be prepared to justify why you used it. If the interviewer asks, how does the script handle errors? Or how can we make it better? You must have quick thinking and respond confidently. Even if you replace their question with your own prepared script, that's okay. But you need to be able to justify your process logically, be able to justify your choices, and suggest possible improvements. This will make an excellent impression and show that you're not coding blindly, but rather thinking and considering carefully the solution. Be ready to talk about your industry, your role, and your team. One of the simplest but least employed questions during DevOps interviews is, tell me about your current job, how many employees you have in your department, and what you do every day. Looks simple, doesn't it? But most candidates mess up here because they either provide a vague response, like simply saying, I work in DevOps dealing with infrastructure, or they cannot explain precisely where they belong in the broader context. Difficulty in expressing actual responsibilities and concerns might fail you in the interview. You require a straightforward answer which demonstrates your team size and composition, such as who do you work with? Also, identify your sector, for example, finance, e-commerce, healthcare, etc. Also, be prepared for the question related to your typical day-to-day tasks. What do you actually do? And the problems you overcome. The more realistic the problems, the stronger will be the answer. Now let us see how to answer these questions one by one. The team size question, how to answer. Your answer should show why you belong in the team. If you simply say, I belong to a team that encourages DevOps, then that is a vague response. For a better impression, you can instead say, I'm a DevOps engineer working along with 5 other DevOps engineers who serves over 20 developers. I handle CI/CD infrastructure automation and cloud cost optimization. I work with back-end engineers, security teams, and QA to make deployments easier and minimize downtime. This immediately indicates to the interviewer what you did and how you created an impact. Now let us jump into how to describe your daily activities. Most candidates go blank or start thinking about unimportant activities when asked, what is a typical day like for you? They end up with poor answer such as, I oversee infrastructure and track deployments. Instead, prepare a narration explaining something like, every day, I begin by tracking system health metrics in Grafana and checking alerts. If all is good, my time is spent enhancing CI/CD pipelines, streamlining build times, and fixing failing tests. I also work alongside developers to make deployments successful and debug pipelines as required. Can you see the difference? The second answer appears authentic and methodical, not vague. Next is how to talk about the industry you worked in. Various industries have various DevOps challenges. If you can demonstrate how DevOps is applied in your industry, you will be noticed. Let me explain this clearly with sample answers by sector. If your current project belongs to e commerce, you can say, I managed busy deployments, making sure there were no downtime during flash sales. In case of finance or banking, you can say, I performed security focused DevOps, where I ensured PCI DSS compliance and automated deployment. If yours is a healthcare industry, you can stress the point, I used HIPAA compliant infrastructure with encryption of data and secure cloud deployments. The key takeaways from this would be when asked about your team, work habits, or industry, have a clear and well organized response up front. This will make you sound experienced and confident. One of the most common DevOps interview questions is, can you walk me through your end to end CI CD pipeline that you built? Sounds simple enough, huh? But that is where most candidates get stuck. They either fail to provide a formal response or they are explaining a real world CI CD process that does not follow best practice. You cannot expect every company to follow industry best practices in DevOps, but interviewer expect a better responses backed by global standards, and this raises too many questions and disputes. This is what you must do. Organize at least 2 to 3 well-configured CI/CD pipelines and prepare a narration upfront. To better prepare, have one for a basic application, front-end plus API, and another one for a cutting-edge microservices-based system if you can, and one narration explaining cloud deployment automation on AWS, Azure, or GCP. This way, regardless of the question the interviewer asks, you have a solid response available. It is always better to prepare based on your real-time experience so you can answer any technical questions related to the narration you narrated. A simple narration should look like, I created a CI/CD pipeline for a Node.js microservices application on GitHub Actions. It consisted of 3 primary stages: build, test, and deploy. We utilized Jest for unit testing and SonarQube for code quality checks for testing. We utilized Kubernetes with Helm for version deployments for deployment. Always try to tie your answer with industry best practice. Even though if your company did not follow industry best practices in designing CI/CD, make sure your answer does. If you provide an old or unconventional response, the interviewer might knock it down. If, for example, if you say, we manually approve the deployment via email before we deploy to production, you've exposed yourself to unnecessary questioning. Instead, prepare your answer to meet the best practice of today. Do a thorough research before finalizing your narration. You can say, we utilize GitHub Actions to trigger automatic builds and testing. After all tests are successfully passed, the pipeline pushes a Docker image to AWS ECR. Argo CD then handles deploying it to our Kubernetes cluster using GitOps principles. This way, you prevent arguments about outdated processes and maintain the focus on your expertise. Also, be prepared to answer if any questions raised around the narration. Be prepared to justify your tooling choices. The interviewer might ask, why did you use Jenkins instead of GitHub Actions? Or why Terraform instead of CloudFormation? If you don't have a great response, you may get stuck here. Do a proper research. Find out the pros and cons of every tool you choose in your pipeline. Make sure you show reasoning and not preference. For instance, we liked GitHub Actions over Jenkins because we needed an entirely managed experience with excellent GitHub integration. It reduced our maintenance overhead and enabled us to have quicker builds with parallelized workflows. If asked on infrastructure automation, you can narrate saying, We went with Terraform over CloudFormation due to the need for a cloud agnostic solution that is AWS, Azure, and GCP supported. See the difference? A solid, well documented answer builds trust. Always be prepared to describe your CI/CD pipeline in proper industry standard vocabulary. Also ensure you can explain the choice of each and every tool you choose based on a valid justification. The tool choice might be influenced or decided by your DevOps architect. All you need to do is build a solid justification around the decisions you make as a team. Now that we have covered some basic strategies and real-world interview tricks for DevOps interview preparation, now I want to hear from you. What's the biggest challenge you have faced in your DevOps interview? Drop it in the comments. I'll personally respond and help you out. And if you found this helpful, here's how you can support the channel. Like this video so more people can learn these strategies. Subscribe and hit the bell icon for more tool-specific DevOps interview questions, tips, and tricks. Share this with a friend who's preparing for a DevOps job. They'll thank you later. That's it for now. See you in the next video where we break down